Mud. That was the first thing Corporal James Avery remembered about Normandy, mud and the smell of iron. He wasn't a hero, not in the way posters promised. He didn't carry a rifle, just a medic's satchel and a cross stitched to his sleeve. But the bullets didn't care about crosses. The rain had stopped hours ago, yet water still pooled in shell holes. The front line was somewhere ahead, shifting by the minute. Avery crouched behind the shattered hull of a half-track, his hands trembling as he tied off a tourniquet on a young private's leg. "You're gonna be fine," he said, though the kid's skin was gray and cold. A mortar whistled. Instinct took over. Avery threw himself over the wounded man as the blast hit 30 yards away, dirt and shrapnel raining down like angry hail. When the ringing faded, he pushed himself up. "You still with me?" The private blinked, then passed out. Avery checked the pulse, faint but there. He dragged him toward the aid truck, one step at a time, boots sinking deep in the mud. "Medic, over here." Another voice, another body. There were always more. He spotted two soldiers huddled near a crater, one holding his stomach, the other frozen in shock. Avery slid beside them, fingers already pulling gauze from his bag. "What's your name, soldier?" "Franklin," the wounded man gasped. "Good. Stay with me, Franklin." He pressed a dressing against the wound, his hands slick with blood and rainwater. The air was thick with cordite and fear. A rifle cracked nearby. Then another. The enemy was close. Avery's sergeant yelled from behind a sandbag wall, "Doc, get your head down." He ignored him. Franklin needed pressure on the wound, not protection from stray bullets. "Don't you quit on me," Avery muttered. Franklin tried to smile. "Didn't plan to." A shell burst down the road. The blast threw Avery back, his kit spilling across the mud, morphine vials, scissors, bandages. He scrambled to gather them, heart pounding. When he looked up, the crater was empty. Franklin was gone. He stared at the dark hole where the man had been seconds ago. Only the wind answered. Avery picked up his blood-stained satchel and whispered, "One more I couldn't save." Then the radio crackled. "All units, push forward. We're advancing." He tightened his straps, wiped his hands on his sleeve, and moved toward the smoke. The war wasn't waiting. By mid-morning, the push had begun. Tanks growled through the haze, crushing barbed wire under their tracks. Riflemen advanced in staggered lines, faces gray with fatigue and fear. Corporal James Avery moved among them like a ghost, bent low, eyes scanning for the fallen. The air was thick with cordite and ash, the world reduced to noise and smoke. "Medic," a voice screamed from the ridge. He sprinted uphill, slipping in mud. A soldier lay sprawled near the roots of a shattered tree, clutching his throat. Blood pulsed between his fingers in short, desperate bursts. "Hold still," Avery said, tearing open a bandage packet. His own hands shook, but the training held. "Pressure first. Tilt the head. Check for breath." The man's eyes rolled toward him, wide, terrified. He couldn't speak. "You're gonna make it," Avery whispered. "Just breathe." He reached for his morphine syringe, but froze. The man's chest stopped moving. No pulse. Avery sat back in the mud, staring at nothing. The shells kept falling, the tanks kept moving, and another heartbeat had slipped away right under his hands. He forced himself to stand. "Next one," he muttered. The radio crackled nearby, company command shouting about pinned units on the far side of the orchard. He started running again, leaping a fence into a field littered with helmets and torn maps. Halfway across, a mortar shell landed 20 feet ahead. The blast threw him flat. His ears rang, and when he lifted his head, a sharp pain stabbed behind his eyes. Through the ringing, he heard someone calling. "Dog! Dog!" A figure stumbled toward him, Sergeant Miller, bleeding from the shoulder. Can't stop now, Miller said, voice hoarse. They're trapped out there. Avery slung Miller's arm over his shoulder, dragging him behind a knocked-out Sherman tank. You need a dressing. Forget me, Miller growled. Those boys in the orchard, no medics, no cover. Avery hesitated, then nodded. All right, I'll get them. He grabbed a fresh satchel from the fallen aidman beside the tank, half empty but still stocked, and took off toward the orchard. The ground was torn to ribbons, trees split down the middle, the air filled with flies and smoke. The smell was worse than anything he'd ever known, blood and gunpowder and rot. He dropped beside the first body, alive barely. A private with shrapnel in his thigh. Avery cut away the cloth and tied a tourniquet with his teeth. The man screamed, then went limp. Stay with me, Avery yelled. You hear me. Another explosion. Dirt showered over them. He shielded the wounded man, clutching his helmet tight. When the dust cleared, a rifle squad was waving him over from behind a broken wall. More here, Doc. He looked back once at the orchard full of broken trees and bodies, then crawled toward the next voice. There was no time to think. No time to pray. Only the next wound. Night came without stars. The sky glowed faint orange from distant fires, and the wind carried the low hum of engines retreating somewhere over the ridge. Corporal James Avery sat outside the field tent, his uniform stiff with blood, not all of it his own. His hands trembled as he struck a match, but it went out before touching the cigarette. He let it drop into the mud. Inside, the medics worked under dim lamps, shadowed figures bent over stretchers, their movements steady, mechanical. The tent smelled of disinfectant, morphine, and fear. Doc, someone called softly. Avery turned. Private Reynolds stood in the doorway, bandaged arm hanging in a sling. Captain says we're pushing again at dawn. Avery blinked. Dawn. Reynolds nodded. They say the Germans are breaking. He tried to sound proud, but his voice cracked halfway through. Avery managed a faint smile. Then I guess I better get some sleep. Reynolds hesitated. You saved me today. Avery looked away. No, kid. You just got lucky. The private left and the flap closed behind him. For a moment, all Avery heard was the whisper of canvas in the wind. He rose and stepped back into the tent. Rows of wounded lay side by side, some sleeping, some whispering names of people far away. One man clutched a bloody photograph to his chest. At the far table, Sergeant Miller sat upright, pale but alive. Doc, he rasped, you holding up? Avery forced a smile. Been worse. Miller gestured toward a pile of bloodied bandages. Not sure it gets worse than this. Avery poured a bit of water from his canteen, washing the grime from his fingers. You just focus on healing. I'll handle the rest. The sergeant chuckled weakly. You always do. He closed his eyes, and the laughter faded into shallow breathing. Avery stood there a long moment before pulling the blanket higher around the man's shoulders. He stepped outside again. The wind was colder now, sharper. Far to the east, artillery flares rose and fell, painting the clouds red. He thought of Franklin, of the men in the orchard, of all the ones who never made it back to the tent. Their names blurred together, a list too long to remember and too heavy to forget. He sank to his knees beside the empty supply crate and whispered, If I stop feeling it, I'm no better than the ones who do the killing. Somewhere down the road, an engine sputtered to life. The war was already moving again. Avery picked up his satchel, still stained from the day, and slung it over his shoulder. His hands shook, but not from fear. From exhaustion. From memory. From carrying the weight of those who couldn't. Dawn crept in behind a curtain of smoke. The air stank of oil and wet earth, and the faint sound of artillery rolled across the fields like distant thunder. Corporal James Avery adjusted his helmet and tightened the straps on his medic satchel. He hadn't slept. Nobody had. The camp was already stirring, voices murmuring, engines rumbling, stretchers being loaded onto trucks that might never come back. Sergeant Miller limped out of the tent, arm still bandaged. "You sure you're ready for this?" Avery looked at the horizon glowing red. "No," he said, "but they'll need me anyways." The first barrage hit before sunrise. The ground trembled, dust falling from the trees. Orders barked through the chaos, and the front line erupted again. Avery moved with the first wave of infantry, staying low, weaving between craters. Machine gun fire tore through the hedgerows. Men dropped without a sound. "Medic!" someone screamed from the left flank. He ran toward the voice, heart hammering. A corporal was down, chest wound deep, blood pooling fast. Avery pressed a bandage hard against it, shouting for a stretcher. "Where's your squad?" The man's lips moved. "Gone." A shell landed 50 yards away, the shockwave tossing Avery onto his back. When he rolled over, the wounded man was still. Eyes open. He shut them with his fingers and moved on. Farther ahead, near the ridge, the real fight was happening, German mortars hammering the trenches. Avery slid into one of them, nearly tripping over another medic kneeling beside a dying man. "Pressure's not working," the medic cried. "Clamp the artery," Avery snapped, pulling out his kit. His hands worked automatically now, gauze, scissors, morphine tape. The man's breathing steadied. Then came a call over the radio, casualties heavy at Sector 4. "We're losing the left flank." Avery froze. Sector 4 was half a mile away. He looked down the trench. There was 3 men bleeding out right here. If he left, they'd die. If he stayed, the others at Sector 4 might. For a moment, the noise faded. The screams, the shells, even the rain, all of it vanished under the weight of that choice. Miller's voice echoed in his head. "You can't save everyone, Doc." He clenched his jaw. "Maybe not," he whispered, "but I can try." He grabbed what he could carry, bandages, morphine, scissors, and sprinted toward the ridge. Bullets whipped through the air. One grazed his arm. He didn't stop. When he reached the top, the view took his breath away. Smoke, fire, chaos. Men dragging the wounded through mud, medics shouting for help, and in the middle of it all, a single boy lying alone. Avery slid down beside him, pressing his hands over a deep stomach wound. "Stay with me, kid." The boy coughed, eyes glassy. "Them eyes. Dying." "Not if I can help it," Avery said, forcing the gauze into place. His hands were slippery, his breath ragged. Another shell exploded nearby, showering them both with dirt. Avery ducked, shielding the boy with. By afternoon, the guns were silent. Smoke drifted over the ridge, curling through broken trees and helmets half buried in mud. Corporal James Avery moved among the dead. One clutched a scorched letter. He folded it and slid it back into the man's pocket. "You'll get there," he murmured. Farther down, medics loaded the last stretchers. Engines growled, the air thick with fuel. "Dog." 3 critical on the west line. Avery turned, legs heavy. Sergeant Miller limped beside him. "You can stop now. You've done enough." Avery shook his head. "Not yet." Under a torn tarp lay the wounded. One was Private Reynolds. Reynolds blinked. "Wait, did it?" Avery forced a faint smile. "Yeah, we did." He gave a small shot of morphine, holding the boy's hand until his breathing eased. Reynolds managed a weak grin. "Lucky twice." "Guess you are," Avery said. Rain began again, thin drops over the smoking field. Avery let it wash his hands clean. Miller called from a truck, "You coming, Doc?" Avery looked once at the field, then climbed aboard. As the truck rolled out, rain tapped on the canvas roof. The war kept moving east, hunger